Hi, and welcome to the second exercise in our series. And this time we're still going to be working out in our Class 2 lab in the Seasons folder. This time we're going to be working with the size.html file. And just like we did with opacity, we're going to go ahead and open it up in Dreamweaver or whatever editor you are using. And just like we did with opacity, we need to create a style sheet that we're going to use. So we're going to create an external style sheet. So I'm going to do New, pick Style Sheet, and click Create again. I'm going to save this one right away. And just like opacity, we're going to be doing all of the work in this particular CSS document and not in the HTML. The HTML is just going to stay put. It's going to stay the way it is. Okay, so I'm just going to call this one size.css. Make sure that it's in the same folder where your size.html and images folder is. So I'm going to click Save. And like before, I need to link that, otherwise nothing is going to happen. So we are going to go in and do link and type. Remember, it's text CSS. I'm going to do the rel tag, and this we're looking for style sheet, and the href, and I'm just going to browse, but we know what we are looking for is now the size.css, and close up that link. And again, like before, we're not going to see the images yet. We need to go in and style each of those. And if you would like, go ahead and open, I'm going to go ahead and open the opacity style sheet that we just created because we're going to take some information from it and it'll make it easier. So we know we need some of these things that'll be the same. Okay, if we take a look at the size.html, we're going to notice that it's almost identical to the opacity HTML file that we had. The only difference is I removed the box. I'm going to go ahead and open just so we can compare. So let's open up opacity.html. This one had this div class box. In size.html, I commented that out because if you recall in the example that I showed you, the images go all the way across. So let's just go find the one that I had worked on earlier. So I'm just going to go open file. So as you can see, it goes all the way across. It's not in the box that we did with the opacity. So it's going to be all the way across. So that's why we got rid of the box. So now we're going to go into size. That's our only difference. Everything else is the same. So now what we can do is go ahead and open up your opacity.css that you just finished. But we need to get some of these things you'll notice over here, because it is the same, no images are going to show up until we get the CSS in there, and we have that same season box. So we need to set up the size of that the same as we did with the opacity. So we're just going to copy some of the stuff from over here. So we're going to go from season box in our opacity.css all the way down to the fall class style. We don't need the season box hover just yet. We'll be adding that in. So I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to go into my size.css, and I'm going to paste this in. Now we're not done. There are some changes that we need to make in order to make this happen. So now we have everything copied in, but we're not completely ready to go yet. We need to make some changes because we have things like the opacity is left over and this transition is left over from when we did this before. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these two because we're not going to change the opacity on this one. All of our images, you can get rid of the margin here because we're not in that box anymore, that cube. So I'm just going to get rid of all of that. And instead, I'm going to go up to season box just so that my boxes aren't all right next to each other. I am going to add just a margin here that's consistent for everything. And I'm just going to put 4 pixels in for that margin. So now if I hit save and I have my size HTML, I can go out to my browser and do a preview. And here are my images. This is all they're doing right now, is there just should be across the screen. They're all float left, so if your screen is a little smaller, they will move down and you can't have that same cube. So in a wider screen, we have this. So let's go back and make some of our adjustments in our CSS. I'm going to close the opacity.css. We don't need that anymore, and it might just serve to confuse us. This time we are going to be transitioning the size of it. So what we need to do is adjust the height and the width of these boxes that contain the images. So we're going to do just like we did in seasons. We're going to create season box, hover, because this is an action that takes place when we hover over it. I'm just going to open and close that. And this time, because it's the size, we need to change the height and the width. So I'm going to go height. And I've already done the math for you on this to keep things all nice and proportioned. So the height is 231 pixels and the width is 351 pixels. So I saved my CSS and I'm going to go back out to my web browser and I'm going to click refresh. Now if I hover over this, it should change the size. And notice a couple things happen. One is it happens instantaneously. Remember, that's what transitions allow us to do, is to control the speed and how these things transition. So it does get bigger. But notice the other thing that's happening. Our images are tiling here, because the image itself is only 185 by 281. So we need to make sure that this image gets larger and that it doesn't tile in the space. So we need to go back to our CSS and make a couple changes. So first, we're going to go up into season box, and we're going to say we want the background size to be at 100%, meaning whatever size the box it's in, we want that background to fill the entire size. The other thing, just to make sure that we don't get that tiling, is we want to do background repeat and set that to none, because then it'll just be that single image. So I'm just going to file save this. I'm going to go back to the browser. I'm going to refresh it. And now notice it still transitions instantaneously. It just goes from one state to the next. But our image now fills up that space 100% and it does not tile. So the image is taken care of. Now we need to fix our transition. So let's go back into our CSS file. And just like we did in opacity, we're going to be controlling it within this season box. We're going to say when it transitions, we want it to transition. So we're going to type in transition. And these are the properties that we want to transition. We want the width to transition. And we want it to do it in, we'll say, 3 seconds. And notice when I typed these in, the property that I'm affecting and the time, the duration, there's no commas separating them. But now I'm going to add a comma because there's another property that I want to transition at the same time, and that is the height. And I'm going to do that also at 3 seconds. And at the end, because it is a style, we just do our semicolon. So this is now going to control how quickly this happens. So we're going to file save, and I'm going to come over here and we're going to click refresh. And now notice it goes in this nice slow transition in and out as I move over the images. Pretty cool. So you can again play around with this. For example, say we want the width to change right away, but we want the height to take a little bit longer. So I'm going to file save, go back out to my browser, refresh, and notice that the width goes almost instantly because we have that in 1 second, but it takes a little longer for that height to fill out. So this is how we can control these animations. So we could keep them the same. I'm just going to leave those at 3 seconds, but I encourage you to play around with that. The other thing I encourage you to play around is we could change the opacity and the size all at once. So for example, let's just go in here and type in opacity, just like we did before, and set it at 50%, so 0.5. And let's go down to our season box hover, and we are going to say we want the opacity on the hover to go to 1.0 or 100%. But we need to go up here and also change that. So I'm going to go in here after height, but before the semicolon, and do opacity. And we're going to do the opacity in 2 seconds. I'm going to click save. Let's go back out to our browser and click refresh. And notice we're at 50%. And notice it gets bigger and brighter as we transition over it. That is the basics of how transitions work. So what we did in these two exercises, in the opacity and the size exercises, is we just changed the property and the duration. These are the two things that we need to do at a minimum. In the next two exercises, we're going to play with the timing functions, or easing, and we're going to play with delay as to when things start. Thank you.